Okay, what if the old rules of war just no longer apply? We're going to dig into a source article that imagines this really shocking future event, one that could signal a total rewrite of global power, something that might even be happening right now. Let's dive in. So the source kicks things off with this absolutely startling scenario. A sitting head of state is captured and literally removed from their own country by U.S. forces. Now, of course, this is a hypothetical, but it's designed to make us ask a really radical question. What if the very definition of foreign policy is changing right before our eyes? And this right here, this is the central question the source wants us to wrestle with. Is something like this just a straight-up act of war, a crime of aggression? Or is it the start of something completely new, a whole new playbook for how nations deal with each other? So, according to the source, the first ripple effect from an event like this isn't military at all. It's ideological. It's all about changing the language, changing the words we use to justify actions that, up until now, would have been considered completely off limits. And this is the core idea the source puts forward, the criminal terror node. Think about what that means. The idea is to relabel an entire country, not as a state, but as a criminal enterprise. And why would you do that? Well, the goal is pretty clear. You want to strip away its sovereignty and all the legal protections that a normal country gets. And when you put the old way next to this new doctrine, the difference is just stark. We go from treating nations as sovereign equals to targeting them as criminal networks. Diplomatic talks? Nope. That gets replaced by direct action. And this is the real game changer. The idea that sovereignty isn't some absolute right anymore. It's conditional. It depends on how you behave. Okay, so once you've reclassified a state, what's the next step? Well, this leads us to the second ripple. The source argues that this doctrine isn't really about just one country. It's about going after the global networks that this country supports and protects. And the analysis zeroes in on this strategic link between Caracas and Tehran. It basically paints Venezuela as Iran's main hub in the Western Hemisphere. It's a key spot for getting around sanctions, and it's a place where groups like Hezbollah can operate pretty freely. So the big question is, how does taking out one leader disrupt a whole global network? Well, the theory laid out in the source is pretty fascinating. It's basically a four-step logic. First, you have these networks, right? They're operating with state protection. Step 2, you remove that protection. You take out the leadership. And that leads to step 3, what the source calls trust cost inflation. Suddenly, every deal is riskier. Everything is more expensive. And that's the goal. The final step isn't about total destruction. It's about disrupting the network by just making everything too difficult. All right, the third ripple moves us from the world of security into the world of resources, specifically oil, and how an action like this could be a major play in the great power competition over energy. Now, the source makes a really critical point here. This hypothetical operation, it's not about the U.S. needing Venezuela's oil. Not at all. U.S. domestic production has gone through the roof, and the need for imports has plummeted. So if it's not about getting the oil for yourself, what's it really about? Well, the answer, according to the source, is that it's a classic denial operation. The main target isn't even Venezuela, it's China. The whole point of the move is to cut Beijing off from a major supplier of cheap oil, which would be a big hit to their energy security. So see, it's not about taking the oil, it's about controlling who can't get it. Which brings us to the fourth ripple, and this one's a big one. The unavoidable collision with international law. An action this dramatic is pretty much guaranteed to send shockwaves through the global legal system. And the source doesn't shy away from this. It points to the legal backlash, citing experts who labeled the seizure in the strongest possible terms, a potential crime of aggression. And just to be clear, that's one of the most serious charges you can make under international law. And this really gets to the heart of the problem, this norm fracture. It exposes two worldviews that just can't coexist. On one side, you have the traditional view. This is a violation of sovereignty, it goes against the UN Charter. But on the other, you have this new doctrine. No, this is a law enforcement action against a criminal enterprise. One says sovereignty is absolute, the other says it's conditional. And that disagreement, the source argues, is creating a huge crack in the very foundation of international law. Okay, so we've seen all these different ripples, right? A new doctrine, disrupting networks, the resource angle, and a fracture in international law. So, how do they all connect? Let's pull it all together and look at the source's final big picture argument. The key takeaway from the source is this. An action like the one in Venezuela shouldn't be seen as an isolated event. It's just one move in a much bigger game. It's a targeted response to a world of tangled, networked threats, dangers that don't respect borders and connect in ways we're just beginning to understand. And the source wraps up by arguing that this new approach is really being pioneered in alliances like the one between the US and Israel. It uses this really provocative phrase, a co-evolved defensive metabolism. So forget thinking of them as just allies. The idea here is that they act like a single integrated security system, like one organism. Israel is on the front lines, experimenting and innovating, and the US provides the massive scale and the global reach. This, the source suggests, could be the new model for alliances going forward. And so, in the end, we're left with the huge question that the source puts on the table. This new, aggressive playbook, where you treat states like criminal networks and say that sovereignty has to be earned, does that actually make the world safer by tackling threats head-on? Or does it just open the door to a much more dangerous, chaotic era of escalation, where none of the old rules matter anymore? That's the big question to think about.